Hello and welcome to Voices from Across the Seas, a podcast uncovering the stories of immigrants to Australia. I'm your host, Nelton D'Souza, and I'm excited to share with you the first episode of this podcast. Australia is a multicultural and diverse country with people from all over the world who have made it their home. According to the 2021 census, more than 1 in 4 Australians were born overseas, and more than 1 in 5 speak a language other than English at home. These people bring with them their cultures, traditions, values, and experiences that enrich our society and shape our identity. But what does it mean to be an immigrant in Australia? What are the joys and challenges of living in a new country? How do immigrants balance their cultural heritage and their sense of belonging in Australia? How do they contribute to our economy, our community, and our nation? These are some of the questions I will explore in this podcast by interviewing immigrants from different backgrounds, countries, and walks of life. I will ask them about their stories, their struggles, their achievements, and their hopes for the future. I will also ask them some fun and interesting questions to learn more about their cultures and personalities. My goal is to celebrate the diversity and richness of our immigrant population, to foster understanding and respect among different groups, and to inspire and empower other immigrants who are trying to make a home in Australia. In this first episode, I will be talking to David, who came to Australia from China as an 8-year-old boy, only child of his parents. 30 plus years later, he has a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful children, and lives in a mansion. He will share with us his journey of adapting to a new culture, finding his identity and confidence, building his career and family, and embracing both his Australian and Chinese cultures. So stay tuned for this fascinating conversation with David coming up on Voices from Across the Seas. Hi, David. Welcome to Voices from Across the Seas. It's great to have you here. Why don't you start by telling us a bit about yourself and where you come from?
All right, Nelson. Nice to be on the show. So to start things off, I guess my name is David, and I do come from China originally, wasn't born in Australia. Alluding to what you were saying before, yes, I did come here when I was 8 years old. And yeah, it's been a very quick 30 years, really. Didn't really even notice until you brought that up, really.
Very nice. Time flies.
Sure does.
Cool. So, David, as you mentioned, I understand you moved to Australia when you were just 8 years old. That must have been quite a big change for you. How did you feel about leaving your home country and coming to a new place? I'm sure English and the Australian way of life must have been alien to you, at least to an extent.
Oh, for sure. And look, the whole Eastern-Western dichotomy definitely plays into this, right? I still have very vivid memories before coming to Australia, in the sense that for a while, I was actually reluctant to leave my family and to essentially go to what in essence is a foreign land. And From that perspective, the most difficult thing really is naturally the language barrier, in the sense that China at the time and even now isn't really an English speaking country. We have our own native language that is the primary language, and English really wasn't a thing back then. So I literally came to Australia where I could barely string together more than 10 words, and yeah, we just winged it. But I would say in terms of the change in lifestyle, it would be that during the mid-90s at the time, China, in essence, was extremely poor. And coming to Australia, even living in what is considered a low socioeconomic background-based suburb, even then, it felt like a massive upgrade, in the sense that back in China, for a child to have their own room was essentially unthinkable. Whereas here, it was just the norm. Everyone had their own rooms. Everyone had running hot water. and you would take a shower every day, which wasn't even a thing back then.
Well, okay. That really paints a perfect picture, doesn't it? The two worlds, China, Australia. It's hard to think of China now as something like that. I mean, again, I have not visited China, but it's hard to think, at least going by the images and the videos that we see on the internet. But I can imagine how it must have been.
Oh, yes, for sure. And look, put it this way, when I came to Australia, we didn't even have supermarkets at the time. So to see a supermarket in Australia at the time was like, wow, this is a bit of a big deal.
Yep.
But now, if you talk to an immigrant who would have grew up in China, like me, and then to visit Australia, for them, their experience now would be akin to going from New York to Darwin. For them, it would be like, why did I leave such a big, prosperous megacity to come to this backward, rural place?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes, that experience would be very different.
Wow. I mean, we've heard stories of China growing by leaps and bounds in the 90s, and now China is one of the global superpowers. But for it to race ahead, especially with that size and the population ahead of Australia, is tremendous. And I can't compare because I really haven't seen anything of China, but wow, brilliant. It's amazing.
Oh, look, it's almost unfathomable for people who haven't experienced it. It's almost like the equivalent of, imagine you were on a low income making maybe in today's money, $20,000 a year, which in Sydney, I'm surprised you'd even be alive really on that kind of money.
Yep,
and then
absolutely.
And then to imagine in 20 years' time, you'll be making $500,000. And that kind of gap is the kind of leap and bounds that China essentially experienced in that 20 years' time. So
Wow.
It went from everyone who were so eager to leave China to essentially go to anywhere that would have been a better place to live in terms of lifestyle, to now it's almost questionable for some people. They mostly would come here and realize, maybe I'll go back. This place is a bit too inconvenient for my tastes.
Oh, wow. Okay. I mean, so are you seeing and do you know? I mean, just curious about this question in particular. Are you seeing or do you know of people who have come to Australia and have thought, actually, China is a much better place, so why don't we just go back?
Yeah, for sure. The prevalence of this kind of thinking would be much more compared to before. Whereas if you look at immigrants who showed up here, like myself, in the early 90s, the thought of going back to China was unthinkable. Whereas you look at some of the immigrants that are coming here now, they're like, you know what, I'll come here for uni, so I can relax for a few years and, then I'll go back and get a job and get all my amenities back that I don't have here.
Wow. Very, very interesting perspective. Maybe in the case of China, that's there. But I do know a lot of other economies and other nations, people from other nationalities who come to Australia. And still, Australia far beats the quality of life that they had.
Oh, yes. Quality of life in Australia is, I would say, still ranks very highly.
Okay. Interesting to know. Again, coming back to that 8-year-old David who maybe took his first steps outside China. As much as I admire you, I must take a step back and admire your parents. Your parents must have been very brave and determined to start a new life in Australia. What motivated them to make this decision? Just tell me about the kind of difficulties that they faced in finding work, housing, education, social support, and largely how did they overcome these challenges? I'm pretty much sure there must be a time that they must have felt, let's drop everything and go back. How was it then?
Oh, look, again, it goes back to the state that China was in back in the early 90s, in the sense that back then, the Chinese economy was still reasonably, well, not so much reasonably, mostly state-controlled. Any Western capitalist-based anything really didn't exist. I would say it would be from the mid to late 90s when all the new policies, economic policies came in that allowed for more capitalistic ways of operating the economy came into being, and then everything just took off like a wildfire, right? So for my parents at the time, so my father, who came to Australia first, that was back in 88. So literally at that time, it was a no-brainer in the sense that you could potentially be in China working even an average job, and your life and your lifestyle and your quality of life
Mhm.
would not even match a minimum wage worker in Australia in any sense.
Wow, that disparity.
Yes. So literally, if you had the opportunity to go to, at the time, it was either the US, Australia, or Canada, any of those would have been fantastic choices compared to being stuck in some menial job in a essentially state-controlled economy. If that makes sense.
Yep, it does. So the disparity was one reason why your father decided enough is enough. You got to brave this. So you mentioned that he had an option between the US, Canada, and Australia. Any particular reason why he chose Australia?
Funnily enough, it's because at that time, my uncle, who also had the opportunity to either go to the US, Canada, or Australia, and it ended up being that Australia was the only choice for him because he was not able to go to the US or Canada. So he ended up going to Australia. And for us, it turns out, you know what? He is literally our only relative. So I think Australia is probably a safe bet. And that's how we all ended up in Australia.
It's very common to the Indian way of saying it. Go one, go many. And until that one goes, nobody even thinks that can be a viable option. So I think it's a very now Asian thing as well. So, okay.
Oh, yeah. I think it's generally just an immigrant thing, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So if one person can make it, everyone can make it. Absolutely. So paint a picture of the early days. So your father, he came to Australia. I mean, it must have been surely hard. I mean, the language barriers, cultural barriers. I mean, pretty much Australia in 88 wouldn't have a lot of Chinese-speaking people or cuisine or the food available. Might have been a little bit very alien. So how was it going about then for your parents? Getting a job, blending into the culture, making a life, etc.
Oh, look, and this again talks more to the time frame. Really, when we're looking at the early 90s, that was at a time when, even on a low minimum wage, you could actually live a reasonable life. Even then, even though, again, they weren't exactly landing the best kind of jobs. And the kind of jobs that they were eligible for generally would have been manual labor jobs. And even then, the pay was still not that bad compared to the equivalent in China. So in that sense, when I arrived, to me, it felt like, hey, you know what? This is not too bad, eh? Running water, my own room, very short school hours comparatively. And thinking back, we were actually so poor that we didn't even know we were that poor. But coming from China at the time, it still felt like a big upgrade.
Okay. Did it ever occur to you? I mean, I know still very young, 8 years old, seeing your parents, what were your thoughts seeing them struggle? Did you understand the enormity of the situation, the gravity of the situation, what they were trying to do? Were you supportive of them? Were you like, nah, this is a struggle? What was your perspective?
Oh, Nelton, I think you're giving too much credit to an 8-year-old.
I have a deformed vision, but I'm just asking.
I still remember vividly in my earlier days in Australia. And you know what? I never remembered any instance of any struggle whatsoever. To me,
Wow.
every day was like an excursion, really. Went to school, didn't seem like we actually did much learning. And before you knew it, it was recess, morning tea, which we didn't really have back in China. And after that, another couple of hours, it's lunchtime. Then you basically played around for an hour. And after that, I don't even remember how long it was. It was time to go home. And when I went home, I just watched a lot of TV. And there was always something to watch, even though I didn't really understand it. But I would say watching all that TV certainly helped me take up English a lot faster. But yeah, really, from an 8-year-old perspective, I didn't even know we were struggling. And that's also because we were coming from a much poorer background. So coming from a almost high-end poverty to minimum wage in Australia, it didn't really feel that bad, really.
I'm glad. I'm glad for you. I mean, it can, different perspectives, it can normally be too much for a growing child, but I'm glad it worked for you. I'm glad you didn't feel it was a very harrowing experience. So that's good. But you mentioned you used to go to school. Did you have any challenges? Did you ever feel you didn't fit in or belong? Yeah, I'm pretty much sure back in the 80s, even now also, I mean, people do complain of shades of racism in the 80s, I reckon it must have been a lot more.
Oh, yeah. Naturally, racism is a lot more accessible when you're a very minor minority, if that makes sense. And when you're
Correct.
in a foreign land without many of your own kin, it does feel very foreign. And
Correct.
at the time, I was living in an area that was very predominantly Middle Eastern. And at the time, I was so confused. I'm like, wow, this Muhammad name is very common. We got like 5 in our class. Right?
Okay. One of the most common names on the planet, but yeah, okay. We have 5 Mohammeds on our street. Okay. Did you ever feel that your own identity, your own confidence was changing, etc.?
Funny you mentioned that, because I would say this is something that you notice the older you get, in the sense that when I initially first came to Australia, the whole cultural aspect didn't really factor into the life of an 8-year-old. Essentially, you would either be too busy watching cartoons or just having fun, just doing whatever to pass the time. Really, it was more that when I started entering high school and whatnot, when I realized, you know what, it feels like on one hand, I've been in Australia for a while, but on the other hand, I am Chinese, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was at a time when I would be making more contact with more people from similar backgrounds. And when people of similar backgrounds start congregating, all of a sudden you realize, you know what, all your traditions that you basically forgot about seems to be more of a thing again, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it would enter a phase where it would feel like we would be trying to pivot back towards our roots. It sounds funny when you say it now. It seemed like the cool thing to do at the time. It made you a bit more different and stand out a bit, right? Almost like the kids who, at the time, instead of listening to Western music, they start listening to Asian music. And I was like, oh, yeah, maybe I don't even remember what they're saying anymore, but you know what? It sounds cool and no one else understands it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. But like, if I can jump from that period to today, if you are given an option of listening to the news, would you be more keen on listening to things happening in Australia, even though much apart from strikes and recession, etc., or things happening back in China? Which one would you be more keen in listening to?
Hard to say, right? I would say in this era where free-to-air television is largely ignored by anyone with an internet connection these days, the whole concept of mainstream news doesn't really apply anymore. I would essentially get my news from the internet or from whatever channel really that would be interesting to me at the time. And, you know, in the current year of 2023, I would say Reddit is probably one of my main news sources, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay, Reddit is in the news. I mean, apart from being a news source, okay? So any particular threads or feeds that you tune into Reddit?
Not so much. It's anything that's really interesting, really.
Anyway, okay. Now going back to David in high school, forming your identity, forging through the different grades, getting a job, and then comes the next part of settling down, having a family of your own. I want to know and I want to talk about your love life. I have met your wife and I've met your children, very pretty and beautiful children. So how did you meet your wife and what made you fall for her? I know I've heard this story before, a little bit of it, but just for the sake of our viewers, can you please tell it again?
Well, I guess I still have very vivid memories about all that, thankfully. So I would say it all starts really at around my mid-20s, in the sense that I would say, in my mind, that seemed to be roughly appropriate time to be finding what I would say a long-term girlfriend that I would potentially consider for marriage, if that makes sense. So at the time, being still somewhat conservative / traditional boy, I figured, okay, maybe I will find a girl that my mother would not completely frown upon. So from that perspective, I generally, stuck to generally the Chinese girls as well, which luckily for me at the time, there were a lot more of them as well, so that helped.
Very lucky, very lucky.
And naturally, like a lot of people, you do end up meeting your partner at your place of employment.
Okay.
So yes, I did meet my wife at my work. And the funny thing is, and the funny thing is, the only reason I met her was that she broke so many things, and that at the time I was a financial analyst looking after essentially the general ledger of a multinational company.
Okay.
And so she was working at one of our subsidiaries. And because I looked after consolidation, she broke so many things on her subsidiary general ledger that we were no longer able to consolidate. And I was not able to fix it remotely. So at the time, I distinctly remember hating this person who kept breaking everything. So one day, not being able to fix this thing remotely, I actually had to go visit that subsidiary.
Wow.
And when I went there, I realized she looks okay, eh? And then I started probing her origins because her last name meant that she might be Korean as well. At the time, I figured if she was Chinese, you know what? Let's see where things go. Turns out she was Chinese. So, all right. Yeah, let's give it a go. And then it turned out that one weekend when we were both working on the weekend for month end, she was in the office, I was in the office, and I figured, hey, let's go grab some lunch. And from that point on, we really hit it off. Our values seemed to match. And when I say values, I mean, I guess we were both sort of the lazy type who really wasn't good at being tidy, so to speak, right? So from that point on, and before I knew it, I guess we got engaged and got married, and the kids followed.
Nice. So basically in your story, it's kind of like a very Hollywood kind of story. So you met your partner at your place of work. The many wrongs led to the many rights, or the many broken things led to the many things that actually worked, which is very good. And you all kicked it off over lunch, which is food, and food is something that's very dear to you. I can definitely see this is like a match made in heaven.
Oh, yeah. And the more exciting thing is, at the time, because I was in head office and she was at one of our subsidiaries, we figured it might be a bad idea to, let the rest of the company know that we were dating. So we kept it a secret for a long time, which made it more exciting, really.
Exciting for the both of you or your colleagues as well. I mean, they did not have a whiff of it at all.
Oh, we kept it. We kept the secret very, very well. I think it was up until the point that we got engaged. That was when people started getting an idea that we were together.
Oh, wow. Nice. So she was, along with now your partner, at that time she was your partner in crime as well. So y'all really did a good job.
Yes, you can say that.
Now it feels that this actually feels like a match made in heaven. You mentioned that she's Chinese now, and now I understand that China is a very big country. Like India is a very big country, different cultures in different parts of the country. Did you ever feel that, yes, from a nationality perspective, you're similar, but from a cultural perspective, you're slightly different? And if yes, how did you all blend in those cultures, not only from a marriage standpoint, but also from a family life perspective?
Oh, look, put it this way. If I ended up with a more local girl like myself, I think we would have essentially forgotten most of the traditions, really. But because my wife is actually one of the, what's it called, international students.
Okay.
She actually has a much deeper traditional roots than myself. So because I ended up with her, I ended up essentially reaching back into my traditional roots a bit more, in the sense that now I start celebrating some of the stuff that I forgot that we even celebrated in the first place. And even till now, the mother-in-law would tell me, don't you know today is this festival? I'm like, I don't know, but I think there's some food involved, right? So, no complaints from that side, really.
No, very nice. I'm glad to know that. It's very surprising, and it's actually important as well that this journey of marriage, it's everyone, both the partners, they complement each other. And it also may mean that through one, you actually explore and you go far more deeper into your own self rather than something outwardly, which I think in your case holds true. Now, I know that you all come from the same place, so very Asian cultures, very similar things. Marriage is something that's looked very, very closely with and it's not only an individual decision, but it's a very family decision, at least in our cultures, where it's not about the boy meets a girl and he says, "But I want to get married," and family all supports. There's a lot of questions, there's a lot of examination. Both the parents have to get together, and especially if it's the boy's parents, they do a far more thorough job closely just to make sure that the girl is the perfect daughter-in-law.
I would say from that perspective, we were very Western without thinking, as
Okay.
whether or not the parents were on board or not, we were going ahead either way, deal with it.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's where the Australian King David came out. Like he was like, nothing doing.
Yeah, so look, there's a lot of picking and choosing in terms of the cultural traits that comes in handy at any given time. So for this purpose, being independent and just individualistic, instead of thinking from a more collective perspective, yeah, we went with that because that was more convenient.
Nice. Okay. So you made it very clear with your parents that you're going ahead. What about her parents? Were her parents more accepting, or they had the similar outlook?
Oh, look, I think from that perspective, my wife was sort of the same as well, in the sense that, yeah, this is happening, deal with it, bye.
Nice. Okay. So yes, a perfect match, a perfect couple, very similar ideals, values, but a very similar line of thinking. So I do say that it's falls in complete line with what I said earlier. Match made in heaven. So good on you. Now coming to your children, and I know that this can be a slightly touchy topic. So you have two beautiful children, Philippe and Beryl, if I'm not mistaken, the other names?
Yeah, that's right.
They are Australian born, aren't they?
Yes, their passport says so.
Okay, their passport says that. Now, since you mentioned passports, does China allow dual nationality?
Nope. Once you take up Australian citizenship, that's it for the Chinese citizenship.
How do you raise them now to appreciate both their Australian and their original Chinese cultures, their ethnicity, their heritage? What values do you instill in them?
Oh, look, I would say it certainly helps that we're still speaking Chinese at home.
Okay.
But other than that, really, the only real cultural background that they're really getting from not necessarily us, but actually in this case, it would probably be the grandparents doing the heavy lifting in terms of instilling a sense of traditional Chinese something, really.
Okay.
Because from the parents' perspective, especially in this climate, we are just surviving. Whatever traditional anything we can impart, that's just a bonus on top of really surviving.
Yep. So the language is something that you all speak at home, so they are exposed to the language. What about music, art, history, quotes from Confucius, Jet Li, Bruce Lee, etc.?
Oh, look, I think they're too young for that at this stage. All right. My son is just getting out of the Thomas the Tank Engine phase. Anything else more complicated? Let's wait and see.
Okay. Cool things. Have the plan that as they grow older, you will share more with them about all the cultural heritage, the music, the songs, the movies from China. Is that what you're hoping to see their future as well? To be more connected or have some sort of a connection with China, with their heritage?
Oh, yeah, of course. And look, in this digital age that we live in, having access to all the Chinese content is actually much easier compared to when I was 8 years old in Australia. We only had 3 TV channels with no means to access anything else overseas at all. Right? So back then, you would literally be culturally cut off. Whereas now, you could stream any content onto your TV at any given time. So the concept of being cut off culturally from a media perspective no longer applies. So if anything, I would say these days, it would be a lot easier for kids to indulge in their traditional culture compared to before.
That's a fair point. Yep, I do agree. We live in a far more connected world where information is very, very accessible. But I also believe that that brings about a challenge as well, because you may try to pursue something, but then the distractions are so much on social media that it's easy to get distracted and get swayed by that new piece of information as well. And it needs that certain amount of discipline, a certain amount of cajoling to stay true to the culture, to the heritage, especially when you feel that I'm okay with English, I can make a life with the Australian way of life, and why do I need to be connected?
Oh, Nelton, you're giving too much credit to a 5-year-old again. They're just happy to get any screen time at this stage, really.
Okay, that may be a question for later down the years. Okay, cool. So being an immigrant in Australia has its pros and cons, like we just spoke about. And what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of living in a multicultural society for you in your perspective? How do you cope with the stereotypes and the misconceptions that people may have about you or your culture?
Oh, look, I would say in this day and age, it's actually a lot easier to be an immigrant in the sense that Australia being a much more established multicultural society compared to 30 years ago in the 90s, it's very easy to end up in a suburb where you are essentially surrounded by your fellow countrymen from your mother country, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And naturally, from different cultures, when they are around you, their food is also accessible. So that naturally is generally a big plus. And these days, in terms of cons, can't really think of one because I would say Australia has a reasonably good balance in terms of the different cultures in the sense that they're all reasonably well established so that there wouldn't be any minority cultures that would feel isolated. Or maybe because I'm not in the minority, I wouldn't know anymore.
I'm sure the listeners would be very, very happy to hear this. Any new immigrant who's just come in or who's planning to come in, they will find this very comforting as well. So that's good. Good to know. We all know Australia is a wonderful country, many things to offer. What are some of the things that you love about living here? What are some of the things?
Oh, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is, quality of life. Compared to all the Asian countries, it's far less competitive. So you would definitely not have to work as hard to achieve the same outcomes.
Okay, less input, maximum output, kind of?
Yeah, pretty much. And look, Australia being a Western country, you also do have access to all the other, how should you say, Western media as well. So on one hand, you'll have access to all the Marvel movies and everything that comes into cinemas. And on the other hand, yeah, you can stream all your traditional Chinese content wherever you can find it. And even these days, they're showing foreign movies in the cinemas as well, which shows you just the level of immigration that is in Australia in order to accommodate that kind of thing, which would have been unheard of 30 years ago.
Okay. There's some of the things that you miss from China, you wish they exist in China, they could be available over here?
That would technically come at the cost of quality of life in the sense that one of the main things that the more modern immigrants complain about is the amount of amenities that they have in China that's not available here. And generally, those amenities are driven by ultra-low wage workers, which simply would not exist here in the sense that to have something delivered in China, you can almost have anything delivered in China. And because of the ultra-low wages available, yeah, it would be very economical to have anything delivered very quickly. And because there are so many ultra-low wage workers, you would almost always have a pig in a litter in terms of anything and everything, because there was almost no bottom in terms of how low people are willing to go in order to compete in an ultra-competitive society. Whereas in Australia, we don't have those amenities because the cost of labor is so high. So in essence, the quality of life is almost tied to the level of competitiveness and kind of wages available, if that makes sense.
I get what you mean. There's some of the things you wish were possible, some of the things you wish could be freely delivered to your place, or certain things could just happen without putting in much effort or spending too much.
Well, yes, there's a cost attached, and there's generally a human cost. So again, on one hand, in Australia, people complain, oh, look, the shops close too early and so on. In Asia, the shops open early, open late. Yes, that's available because you have ultra-low wage workers who can work those long hours just so you can go buy something trivial at 11 p.m. at night, which you don't really get in Australia, even in the capital cities.
I agree. It's really a challenge, especially when you see all the stores shutting at 6 and you're like left high and dry as to what do you do. And Thursday is the only day when stores are open till 9. That's the only time you can take a breath and go at your own pace. Otherwise, when I came over here, trust me, I was once in the mall and I'm like, at 6 o'clock, everything around me is shutting down. It's McDonald's was shutting at 6. And actually, they shut at 5:45. They just tell you no orders and they're cleaning up and etc. So it's 15 minutes lesser. And you're like, why and what is happening? I mean, can't they open up till 9 o'clock? Doesn't anyone eat at McDonald's for dinner? But it's very new and it's something that you have to get used to. I still struggle with it because if I need to buy something, I need to plan it in advance. And I understand the reason and the rationale behind it, but it still sometimes feels very inconvenient.
That's the price you pay for high quality of life.
That's the price you pay for high quality of life. Right. Work-life balance. That's the term. Okay. Have you visited China ever since you moved here? I mean, many years back, but how many times have you visited China? And what were your perspectives every single time when you went back and came to Australia? Did you see any significant, something notable, any notable change?
Oh, of course. And again, it sort of goes back in that time frame in the mid-90s. Airfares weren't as so accessible compared to now. So I believe back then we would probably go back to China maybe every 2-3 years. Whereas now it's entirely normal for us to be visiting China at least once a year, minus COVID, right?
Okay, yeah, sure.
And in that time, I think that was the time where I would be seeing the biggest changes, leaps and bounds in terms of lifestyle, infrastructure, everything. And to give you an idea, one of the main things that stuck in my mind was back in the year 2000, when Shanghai launched its first metro line. And every subsequent year that would go back, the metro line would essentially double itself. And by the time I went back, maybe in the mid-2010s, the network was something, off the top of my head anyway, what seemed like 10 times the size of the Sydney train network, which,
Wow.
to put that into perspective, they essentially, in potentially 1/10 of the time, built 10 times more network. And they are, and it probably costs 10 times as less as well for the commuters.
Yep.
That's the type of transformation we're talking about, not just at the infrastructure level, but across almost every facet of the country, whether it's lifestyle, quality of life, infrastructure, and media consumption, and the consumption of luxury goods. Everything basically exploded up to the point now where, alluding to what I was saying before, whereas before immigrants would love to come to Australia and stay, now they see Australia more as a sort of a backwater place, if that makes sense.
Yep. I'm getting what you're saying, especially if you see that kind of transformation. At one point where you were lagging, suddenly now you're leading, then obviously the one that you're comparing to, in this case Australia, would feel it's gone left behind. So I agree. Okay. It's to an extent unfathomable, but it is what it is. So I think that's something that we should give credit to China for changing its story. Well, David, I have one final question, but before that, I'm very tempted to do a few rapid fire questions with you. It's going to be fun. So I don't
All
know about. Just be yourself and boom, boom, boom. Go for it. So, okay. First question coming your way. What's your favorite Australian slang word or phrase?
Australian? That's hard to say because I feel like these days we're so Americanized. Whatever slang we use, I don't think we can realistically attribute it to Australian roots. But if I had to pick one,
Yep.
it's probably, nah. Like,
Yeah, nah.
I think that's a very typical Australian thing that you wouldn't really see in any other Western country, really.
Yep. You mind explaining it to our audience what yeah means?
Oh, it means exactly what it says. Yes and no.
Yes and no, you're very unsure. Well, no, I don't know which one. It's kind of like, what's your favorite Chinese slang, idiom, or proverb?
I don't think I can answer that one. I feel like I've been Australianized to the point that I don't really have any real Chinese slang that I can defer to.
Okay, I might be able to answer this. In the movie Entrapment, I remember there was this dialogue like Confucius said, "Do not kill mosquito with cannon." I think I like that one.
Oh,
Okay.
I don't think we refer to proverbs like that.
Okay.
I know at least.
That was the only reference I had of Confucius. So, okay. What's your most embarrassing or funny thing that has happened to you because of cultural misunderstanding in Australia?
Most embarrassing or funny? Maybe not necessarily related to me being an immigrant of Chinese origin. I would say it's more with my dealings with other immigrants. I remember once I was in JB Hi-Fi and a French girl was asking me for directions in terms of where to buy something. And it was very shocking to me at the time because she was asking me, can you help me with a douchebag? I'm like, excuse me? Douchebag? What is going on? And then she corrected herself. No. I meant douchebag. What she was trying to say was touchpad. But touchpad. Like a mouse touchpad. But instead, because she was putting a heavy French slant on it, it was coming out sounding like douchebag.
Okay.
And even turned out that has stuck with me. And I still tell the story here and there.
Amazing. Okay. Amazing. Okay. I think even now the French may struggle with actually saying some of these things and they may be interpreted as douchebag. Can never say. So, well, help them. What's the most weirdest or exotic food that you've tried in Australia?
Most exotic?
Yep.
Hard to say because Australia is actually so multicultural, right? If I was in Shanghai, there would not be accessible Vietnamese food, Thai food, or Indian food in the same suburb. Whereas here, just about any and every suburb, there would be a Thai restaurant, there would be an Indian one, probably not a very good one. And like and Vietnamese restaurants everywhere, Lebanese restaurants, all easily accessible, anywhere and everywhere. And it almost seems what may have been exotic before no longer could be considered exotic because you could almost access it anywhere and everywhere anyway. So look, putting that into perspective, I would say probably, I think, Ethiopian food. Because at the time, dating with my now wife, we were always finding interesting things to eat. And you know what? Not every suburb has an Ethiopian restaurant, so we tried that. So yeah, that's probably the most exotic thing I can think of.
Okay, nice. Any Chinese dish that you have introduced to your friends, which you would regard as the best in your culture, as per your heritage?
Oh, can't really answer that one. Too many to list. But I'll tell you what I do like. I really like the fake Chinese food. That doesn't actually exist in real Asia. So the first thing that comes to mind is honey chicken. I love that stuff. You can't get that anywhere in China at all.
Tell me the most beautiful place that you visited in China and in Australia.
China? Hard to tell because when you're young, maybe you don't really remember these kind of things. I would say scenery is probably not on the top of the list for a 5-year-old.
Sure. Any historical place?
Not necessarily beautiful, but also memorable. Probably the Great Wall of China. That always seems to come up, right? It was supposed to be one of those things that you can see from space and whatnot. So we visited that and yeah, pretty memorable. Not necessarily beautiful. Just to me, it felt like a bunch of rundown rocks, but a lot of rundown rocks.
A lot of rundown rocks. Okay.
Yes. And in Australia, again, hard to say. For those who are not familiar with Australia, you might think it's very scenic, but for a resident, everything seems very normalized in the sense that people say, wow, Australia has the nicest beaches. And to us local residents, it's like, the parking's too hard. I wouldn't bother.
Absolutely. Panda, perfect example.
Oh, that's for tourists. Come on.
The parking is a pain. Even if it's for tourists, it's a pain.
That too.
What's the most common or annoying question that people ask you about your culture or background?
I don't think we do get asked that anymore because there's such a big Chinese population these days. I don't think it really occurs to someone to have to ask because we're so common. We're not seen as really exotic anymore to be asking these kind of questions. Okay.
Suppose by any chance, and if you had to impress an audience, give them one fact or a trivia, a tidbit about China, a surprising fact, what would that be?
Not necessarily surprising, but I would say my sort of main go-to is always along the lines of the population of Shanghai, one city, exceeds the entire population of Australia.
Yep.
And that would tell you the kind of density that I used to deal with compared to the density that I deal with now. And having people complain about that density. And in my mind, I laugh at them thinking, oh, mate, you've never left Australia clearly to be complaining about Australian density.
Yep. No, correct. I would agree to that. The population densities in many Asian cities, Shanghai, many others, many cities in India included, outnumbers and outweighs the entire population of Australia. And that is a very significant difference because it's then only when people put it into perspective. Sometimes I wonder when people from Australia, again, nothing against them, they say we'll go on solo trips. I'm like, where? We'll go on solo trips to Delhi, Bombay, and stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't think you should go there because I'm like, you don't know the number of people who are going to bump into you. There's no place to stand. So I think
Well, you don't know what you don't know until you do.
Until you do. I agree. Who's your favorite Australian celebrity or personality? And tell me one from China as well.
Oh, that's a very hard question again. I would say due to the current era that we live in, where we do get so much easy access to essentially global media,
Mm-hmm.
I can't really pinpoint to any Australian celebrities that really tickles my fancy. But then again, I would say personally, I'm not really big on celebrities anyway. I never really saw the need to almost treat them like idols. So
Okay.
no specific Chinese or Australian celebrities that really comes to mind for me.
Okay. What is something that Australians do that you find strange or amusing? And if I can turn this around, what is something that you do that many people find strange or amusing?
I would say this probably may be a global phenomenon. I would say Australians are well known for the level of apathy
Okay.
across many things. And hence you would get the label Australia being, the lucky country, and that's supposed to be tongue in cheek in the sense that it doesn't actually refer to Australia being a lucky country because we are lucky. It's more so that Australia is a lucky country because we are so inept in that sense, if that makes sense. And for me, I guess from a cultural perspective, and this is probably still very prevalent for all Asian immigrants, is that our views on education are almost directly opposite of what you'd expect from local Australians, where they probably seem to be more interested in sports, whereas for us Asian immigrants, education will always be number one.
Nobody can beat that. You're either a doctor or an engineer. If
That's right.
you're an accountant.
Yeah, how it works.
Yes, that's the Asian formula to success, I believe. And my next question, I'm pretty much very close to your heart. What's your guilty pleasure? Be it food, be it music, or be it television?
At this age group, with 2 kids, I think my guilty pleasure is just to be able to do nothing. That is my guilty pleasure, to be still awake and to be able to do nothing. Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
If you asked me 10 years ago, I'd probably give you a different answer. And even 10 years before that, again, a different answer again. But at this time in my life, yeah, to be able to do nothing and to be awake to do it.
I completely get what you're saying. So, okay, that's a very, very true, transparent, honest answer. Now, I know that I've been at your place, been very welcomed and treated to some wonderful Chinese hospitality over hot pot. If you had an opportunity of inviting any 3 people in the world, any 3 people dead or alive, let's go to that extent, any 3 people for a meal of hot pot, who would they be and why?
Oh, look, I would say my answer would be heavily influenced by the global media that I'm consuming these days.
Okay.
So look, off the top of my head, probably Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, and I don't know, maybe Jordan Peterson.
Okay. Are you a fan of these 3 or just, they're on top of your head, reading a lot about them nowadays, that's why?
Oh, look, I think in terms of global media, the current algorithm heavily favors them.
Okay. Fair. I do hope that you have the privilege and pleasure of having these 3 at your place. I'm sure they will enjoy the hot pot.
Oh, look, I'm not too fussed. Again, going back to my guilty pleasure of just doing nothing. I'd still prefer to do nothing, really.
Okay, the next one is just very straightforward. Which one do you prefer, Vegemite or soy sauce?
Well, funny you mentioned that because those 2 food types are both, you can only enjoy them in moderation. And I would say for practicality, Yeah, look, soy sauce for sure. But, for that once in a while, something especially, to prank people who've never tried Vegemite, then Vegemite's the go-to.
It's awful. But that's...
Oh, it's an acquired taste. You will eat it until you love it.
But yeah, I think getting to the point of me loving it itself is a big challenge. I tried it once on a very small, tiny corner of a toast. I put a little bit of Vegemite on it. Trust me, I couldn't eat any more. I believed that my journey ended there. The acquired taste was a very far distant possibility.
That's fine, Nelton. I guess it is my duty to introduce you to the new religion that is Vegemite later.
There are many new religions in your opinion. Aren't you trying to convince me to get onto what are they called? Bluetooth mice and keyboard and watches and all of them. The list is endless, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, for sure. More the merrier. There are no limits on how many religions you want to pick up.
Sure. Okay. Good day or ni hao?
I don't use either.
Which one would you use more frequently?
Oh, look, I think from that perspective, I would say the more Australian side of me kicks in. And I would say we probably defer to more of a grunt than either of those. So something along the lines of, it is probably the closest thing, really.
Okay, fair enough. A kangaroo or a panda?
You can't eat a panda, and kangaroo doesn't taste that good.
Oh, no, I didn't see it coming.
That would be a coin flip, really. Either one is a fail.
Oh, no. Okay. The Opera House or the Great Wall?
I think the Great Wall has really bad parking, so I'm going to go with Opera House.
Oh, man. No one being so honest and blunt. A meat pie or a dumpling?
Ooh. Hard to say. Dumpling encompasses too many different sub-variants. Pies are pretty straightforward. And look, if it comes down to if I could only pick one and not ever have the other, I would pick a dumpling. Pies, at the end of the day, are pretty average. It's really just a pile of maybe meat and some pastry.
Unless and until you're trying the pepper steak pie, which is pretty good.
Try that. It's okay.
Oh, okay. I felt that was the best.
How dare you, Nelton? I've been in Australia for 30 years. I think I would not have not tried a pepper steak pie.
I definitely feel that you have tried everything. I was very lucky with treating you to some biryani. The real biryani, rather than the fake biryani, which, like you said, which you have. So I was very, very lucky with that.
Ah, yes, HP, the real deal.
HP, the real deal, correct. And we're not getting paid for this promotion. Absolutely. Okay, cricket or table tennis?
My memories of cricket was finding out that ball is actually really hard. So you know what? I'm going to go with the safer option, table tennis.
Okay, cool. Kylie Minogue or Jackie Chan?
Kylie Minogue for sure.
Oh, wow, okay. Very, very clear over there. Okay, cool. Neighbours or Journey to the West?
Neighbours is very forgettable. Journey to the West, there are too many iterations, but I sort of grew up on that, so I'll go with Journey to the West.
Okay, cool. Hugh Jackman or Jet Li?
Jet Li's an old man now. Let's go with Hugh Jackman.
Hugh Jackman is old as well. Okay, fine, if you say so. Okay, so it's been a very, very lovely interview with you, David. You've opened up yourselves to the questions, to sharing with us a piece that may be hidden, and kudos on your journey. You've definitely done very, very well. Kudos to your parents for taking this leap of faith and for them working out. Not many words can actually describe it. It's every successful immigrant journey is something to treasure. It's the start of something new, and I'm glad for you it has worked out. Finally, what are some of the tips or the advice that you would give to other immigrants who are trying to make a home in Australia? Can you suggest some skills, attitudes they need to succeed and thrive in this country?
I would say, again, it comes down to the era that we're in. So in the year 2023, I would say simply, I hope you got money, because Australia's not cheap.
Okay. Well, since I know you, I know that's the best kind of advice that you could give anyone. Because if
I don't think you can ever really go wrong with more money.
Yeah, but I mean, you should always be careful with it, not to overspend. Otherwise, you may just lose it all. So that comes into play as well.
Don't worry, you can fix it with more money.
I don't think I'm winning this, so I surrender. I rest my case. Well, again, but David, thank you so much for your time. It's very, very kind of you. So thank you for being on the show and telling us your story.
Oh, thank you, Nelton. I'll be sure to stuff your face with Vegemite later now that I found out your secret.
Sure, let's see how that goes. Well, to all our listeners, that's all for this episode of Voices from Across the Seas. I hope you've enjoyed listening to David's story and learning something new about his culture and perspective. I want to thank David again for being a wonderful guest and sharing his insights and experiences with us. If you like this episode, please show your support by liking, following, or subscribing to this podcast on your preferred platform. You can also leave a comment or a review to let us know what you think and what you want to hear more of. We have some more amazing episodes coming up, featuring immigrants from different countries and backgrounds who will share their stories with us. So stay tuned for the next episode of Voices from Across the Seas, where we celebrate the diversity and richness of our immigrant population. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.